والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ورحمة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من عمل صالحا من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فلنحيينه حياة طيبة ولنجزينهم أجرهم بأحسن ما كانوا يعملون.
اللهم صل على محمد.
To brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have been discussing some of the elements that create a life that is worth living. There is a promise that Allah has given to the believers in the Quran that if we combine good deeds with faith, amal salih with iman, then He will give us a life that is pure, that is healthy, that is fulfilling, and that is meaningful. And there are many times when we might wonder how it is possible for us to actually live that kind of a life. And what we have discussed so far and tried to understand is that we understand and appreciate that life by discovering what path Allah wants us to take through our own life. The less we try to impose upon Allah something that we think would have been nice, and the more we try to fulfill the opportunities and the chances that He has given us to be a worthy person, the more meaningful, the more fulfilling, and the more blessed our life will be. So it is not going to fit a set pattern. The good life is not defined by a certain amount of income or wealth. It is not defined by a certain lifespan, that a person who dies young, God forbid, cannot live a good life. That life might be far more blessed, far more meaningful, and far more memorable and beneficial for humanity than somebody who lives a very long life. The example of Ahlul Bait, the progeny of the Prophet of Islam, is replete with examples, starting with the beloved daughter of the Prophet, Fatima Zahra sallallahu alayha.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
And many of our imams, and many of their companions as well, whose lives were very short, but we remember them until today, we are inspired by them today, we are guided by them until today. So that hayat tayyibah, that good life, it's not defined by a certain minimum number of years, a certain amount of financial comfort that a person must have in order to be able to say that this is a good life. It's not defined by health. It might be something which is very different from our expectations, even from our preferences, but it might still be blessed if we are able to live that life on the basis of trying to make the best decision that we can make given the circumstances that we are in. And that is key. In fact, I would say that even some of the things that we know or we think we know about Islam, we have to step back from that in order to be able to focus better on what it is that I am to do and what decision I am to make. Sometimes our knowledge of Islamic law, for example, can become an obstacle for us living a good life. Yesterday I gave the example of a marital relation, a marriage relation between a husband and a wife. Now I know several people who got married with the best of intentions, and they wanted to live an Islamic life. They might have even engaged together or separately in the study of Islamic law. But they made a mistake in thinking that the legal restrictions or the laws that are mentioned in our books of law, that is the ideal or the basis for a successful marital relationship. And that is not the case. In some cases, Islamic law is not there to set a baseline or an ideal. It is set to be a safety net so that if things are not going well, we won't fall below that safety net. An example is the time for prayer. We know that the time for Dhuhr and Asr prayers, it lasts from local noon, Zawal time, until sunset. But ahadith don't emphasize that that entire time is the time for prayer. Because our imams did not want us to be saying that, well, the time to recite Dhuhr is whatever sunset time is minus 5 minutes. Enough time to be able to squeeze in the prayer and finish it before the sun dips below the horizon. Ideally, we shouldn't even have to know when sunset is, because rarely, if ever, will our prayers be at that time. But myself and many of us, we probably are more careful to know when sunset is than when local noon is, because we're going to be praying more of our prayers closer to sunset than we are to the beginning of the time when the time for Dhuhr prayer or Asr prayer begins. In the winter in Chicago, it's actually well before noon, sometimes around 11:35 or 11:40. It's before 12 o'clock, and then when the time changes, it comes to be after that time, but we might not know, because that's not what we're praying. The fact that the time for Dhuhr and Asr prayer ends at Maghrib, or at sunset, is not meant to be a baseline for us or an ideal for us. In fact, we're better off if we live our lives in such a way that we don't even have to know when the time for the prayer ends. We should know it, because sometimes, and hopefully only when circumstances are beyond our control, we may need to actually pray at that time. And some of you may be aware that with the time for some of our prayers, like Maghrib and Isha, there is actually a difference of opinion among the ulama or the scholars as to whether the time for the prayer ends. There was a time when even some of our Shi'i scholars and fuqaha, they said that the time for Maghrib, it doesn't end when most of us know it to end, which is the time for Maghrib and Isha. It lasts until the middle of the night, but not midnight, because midnight in English means 12 o'clock a.m. That's not when the time for Maghrib and Isha ends. And it's not the halfway point between sunset and sunrise, it's the halfway point between sunset and dawn, or about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer or a little bit less, before the middle of the night, before the halfway point between sunset and sunrise. Now, that middle of the Islamic night, that is when the time for Maghrib and Isha ends. But many of our Shia fuqaha in history and the fuqaha of other schools of thought, the four Sunni schools, Zaydi, Ismailis, they also had this opinion that Maghrib ends sooner than that. Some would say that it's 1/3 of the night. Some would say that it's when the redness of the sky, the western horizon, when it turns dark, whatever the exact limitation may be. There was that opinion even among the Shi'i scholars. And then there is also that leeway that is given for Maghrib, or for Maghrib and Isha both, or for Isha alone, that if you are not able to pray it by that middle of the night, then you can pray it until the time for Fajr enters without making an explicit intention that it's on time and without making an explicit intention that it's late. Why? Because there is some ambiguity in the ahadith as to whether the prayer would be on time or whether it would be late. My point is that there is a reason for this difference of opinion among the fuqaha. The reason for this is not just because the Sunnis didn't get it right, they didn't have Ahlul Bayt. The difference of opinion even exists among those who did follow Ahlul Bayt. The Shia Ithna Ash'ari and the Zaydi and the Ismailis, even those who came up to Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, and we have a shared heritage. Even among the Shia Ithna Ash'ari there is still that difference of opinion. The reason for that is our Imams themselves would say that Maghrib you should pray on time. Every prayer has 2 times. You can pray it at the beginning of the time, but if you are busy, if you have to catch lunch first, then you can delay your Dhuhr prayer, your Asr prayer a little bit. Fajr, if you wake up early, then you can pray it at the beginning of its time, you can pray it a little bit later, but Maghrib, you should really pray it at the beginning of its time. And then there are different levels of emphasis about praying it closer and closer to the beginning of the time, so that if you're not able to pray Maghrib right on time, then it's not that, well, any time before the middle of the night, but pray it close to that time. And so different fuqaha have different interpretations or understandings of when the end point is. This is a reminder for us that when we look at a book of law, we are looking at it basically as, what are the red lines? That is what we are concerned with. But when the Imams would teach Islam, they would not be teaching law, they would be teaching fiqh, which is a deeper understanding of Islam, which is to tell us what should you be doing. And what we should be doing is not just a matter of what is the red line, where do we begin and where do we end, but it is how should we make the decision about what action is most important right now. There are some times when, even if the time for prayer comes, we might be better off doing something else, completing it, and doing our prayer afterwards. If there is, for example, a friend in need whose life is in danger and we need to assist them and save their life and then come and perform our prayer. The Imams would look and teach from a comprehensive perspective. And that is one of the reasons why sometimes understandings of Islamic law have differed. But whether the Islamic law is clear or whether there are differences, we should not base our understanding of Islam on the law. If a husband has to say to his wife that this is my right, now the law is there for a purpose, and in some cases rights do need to be asserted. But if I need to say that to my wife, if my wife needs to say that to me, something is broken in the relationship. The very fact that we have to refer and find out what does the law say in this case, that means that the relationship is in need of repair. There is a need of better communication or counseling, to visit a scholar, to go to a counselor, to visit an elder in the family. We need to figure out what is wrong. The longer that we are referring to the law, the longer whatever is wrong with our relationship will continue to fester and cause harm. So sometimes people think that, well, they can play off the mutual rights, and that will lead to a Islamic marriage. A husband will say that, well, I have the obligation to provide support for my family, but I also have the option to, if I can afford it, marry more than one wife. A wife will say that, well, I don't have any obligation to do housework. So when you come home, you cook yourself a meal and clean the house yourself, or find somebody to clean it. That's not my obligation as a wife. These and many other laws, they are part of Islamic law. But if the relationship comes to that point, it's not an Islamic marriage. And that is not the reason for those laws to be on the books. I mentioned yesterday when it comes to the issue of multiple marriage, that was not meant to be something that is front and center when people look at Islam or the Islamic conception of the family, that we should look at it from the perspective of what are the boundaries that Islamic law has set. There are legal, and there are ethical, and there are many other factors that Islam has kept in place in defining that law. And in some cases, not just I, not just you, but even our senior most scholars are not able or qualified to fully explain what that context is. And that is why we spent so much time discussing that you need to be infallible. You need to have guidance from Allah in order to be able to give a conclusive answer. For all the rest of us, the most important thing is for us to know what is it that God would want me to do in the situation that I face myself in. What is it that will allow me to succeed in this relationship? Not what are the general boundaries that Islam has placed. So we discussed the issue of marital relations yesterday, and today I would like to add to that the second part of that family relationship, which is the relationship between parents and children. Please recite salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
If you go to Islamic law, this is the part where parents can nudge their children, make sure they're not playing on the cell phone, and say, this is a good part, we can talk about the rights of parents, so make sure you're listening. But there's going to be both parts of that. So be aware, if you want your children to pay attention, there are some things that are going to be in their favor as well. They might use that in their argumentation. So maybe you want to give them something to distract them. Please recite salawat. If you go to the rulings of our Islamic scholars, and you say, when do children owe obedience to their parents? I'm just going to give an example of one fatwa. There are different wordings that are sometimes used and different manners of explaining and exposition. But one example that you will get is that it is not obligatory on a child to obey his or her parents absolutely, except if a parent gives a order to the child, a command to the child, based on a shafaqah, a worry for their well-being, a desire for their well-being. So if, for example, my parents tell me that, you're buying a house and I really want you to buy a house in this town or this subdivision, because I think that's good. If that's the case, then just because they are my parents, in many Islamic cultures, parents will assume that, well, of course I have the right to tell them. I raised them, I fed them, and I can't even tell them where to buy a house and what color to paint the walls and how to live their lives. What's the point of having kids? But no, Islam says that you don't have that automatic right to dictate all decisions to your children. That might be news for some Muslim parents, hopefully not for too many. However, if that same order is being given to the child because the mother or the father is worried about the safety or the well-being of the child. So if I say that, I want to go bungee jumping, and the parent says that, no, I'm worried about your safety. I'm just using that as an off-the-wall example. But if that command is given as a matter of concern or worry, it goes back to that parental desire for the well-being of the child. In such a case, it can become obligatory, or it becomes obligatory, for the child to actually obey the parent. Now, that standard, that one formulation which we find in Islamic law, is actually often a very difficult standard to even determine, both for the parents to sometimes analyze their own emotions and their own reasons for giving advice to their children. And because I've tried to help several children work out decisions, it's almost impossible for many children to figure out exactly whether this standard is fulfilled or not. But the interesting thing is that in Islam and in the Quran, the relationship between parents and children is not based on the idea of obedience. And so ideally, in that relationship, we should never have a situation where a parent needs to give a command or an order to a child once that child is old enough to be able to use their mind, or where a child needs to try to figure out, is this a command that I must obey or that I am within my rights not to obey. The Quran does not speak about ita'ah to parents. In fact, when we were speaking earlier about the verse that we are to obey the people who are in authority among us, we said that to use that verse in the context of political or social rights, it brings down the verse. It cheapens it, and it makes it as if the intention of the Quran and the attention of the Quran is only to our outward social relationships, and therefore it is referring to religious guidance, and therefore those who are in authority are people who have religious guidance and knowledge, and that is why it refers to the imams who are ma'soom, who are protected by Allah from error. The fact that the Quran does not even tell us to obey our parents is further evidence that the Quran does not talk about obedience lightly. When the Quran says that you are to obey those in authority among you, the Quran would not say that to a political ruler or to a judge or to a military commander lightly, because the Quran does not even say that you are to obey your parents. What does the Quran say? The Quran says, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. The relationship is defined by ihsan. In some cases, ihsan may require you to actually obey your parents, even if you have to go out of your way to do so. You might have a mother who likes to hear your voice, and sometimes you are busy, and you might not be able to pay a visit, you might not be able to make the phone call, but to give her that peace of mind, a young student has just gone off to college, and the mother wants to make sure that every morning and noon and afternoon she hears the child's voice to make sure that they're still safe and sound, that they've eaten their lunch and brushed their teeth, and remember to make their bed. Now you might say that, well, now that I'm 23, I'll figure out when to brush my own teeth and I'll remember it. But to reassure your mother, if ihsan requires that you sometimes even humor things that you might not understand, ihsan would say don't even question whether you have to or whether you don't have to, but go out of your way to do so. And in some cases, it might not be possible, or it might not be feasible, or it might not be advisable to actually honor all of those requests. If a parent were to say, or to give advice that is outside their area of expertise, that would clearly be against one's best interest, sometimes because of a cultural or an age barrier, or for whatever other reason, the parent is not in the best position to give the best advice. And the child knows that, or they're able to gain that insight from their experience, or maybe from getting the advice and the consultation of others. When I am not going to be able to listen to the advice of my parents, or even to their command, I can't say that, Mom or Dad, you don't know what you're talking about. You grew up way back when, way over there. This isn't that world. But I still have to maintain ihsan, whether or not obedience is actually relevant, whether or not it is possible. Ihsan is an entirely different area for us to focus on. So the Quran defines our relationship with our parents, and therefore the ideal relationship between parents and children is for us not to have to find out what the legal requirement is. And that requires a great deal of communication and flexibility on the part both of parents and of children. So I want to look at a few of the ahadith of our Ma'asumin alayhi salatu wassalam with regard to this relationship. Please recite salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
One hadith is from our sixth Imam, Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
And in this hadith, the Imam, he defines ihsan. He says, al-ihsan an tuhsina suhbatahuma. Ihsan begins by being a good companion. It might be our habit since we were growing up, and because our parents would always indulge us, that we remember them when we need a loan. We remember them when we need support. But once we are old enough to be able to take care of ourselves, our parents should be able to rely on us. Our company should be pleasant for them. It should be a source of support and strength for them. So the Imam says that ihsan is that أن تحسن صحبتهما, that when you are with them, when you are in their company, you do it in a pleasant, in a goodly way, in a beautiful way, such that you're no longer treating them as if they are that bank or that source of giving that they have always been. And many parents would willingly do that for as long as they have the strength and the ability to do so. But the child, as soon as we are able, we should want to be a source of strength and support for our parents. And then the Imam says, وَأَنْ لَا تُكَلِّفَهُمَا أَنْ يَسْأَلَاكَ شَيْئًا يَحْتَاجَانِ إِلَيْهِ وَإِنْ كَانَا مُسْتَغْنِيَيْنِ. You should live with them in such a way that they should never have to ask you anything that they might need, even if they're wealthy on their own. But if they have no financial need, they can take care of themselves. But if it's possible for you to take care of their tasks, whether it be their yard work, whether it be a physical task that you can do for them, even if they're able to do it, even if they would want to do it for themselves, then you should try to do so yourself. And if it's something that they need and they can't take care of themselves, then a child shouldn't say that, well, whenever you need me, I'm only a phone call away. No, the phone call should come from the child to the parent. They should not have to ask. They're asking, then it is not ihsan. It is now shame that a person feels that, well, I have to fulfill the request. I've been asked. It would be a very rude person who would say no to a request. Some of us are at that point, and we have to immediately rectify that. But that's just to save ourselves from being rude. The idea is that they shouldn't even have to ask. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is indicated in a hadith of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this hadith actually encapsulates both sides of the relationship. And it's a very beautiful hadith. It's one that, if you don't remember it in Arabic, then memorize it in English and remind yourself of it, whether you are a parent or a child. The Prophet said that رَحِمَ اللَّهُ وَالِدَيْنِ أَعَانَا وَلَدَهُمَا عَلَى بِرِّهِمَا. May Allah have mercy on a mother and a father who assist their children in showing kindness to them. There are some parents who make it quite difficult for their children to show ihsan. That doesn't take away their right. Nothing that a parent does can take away their right that they have on a child. We can't say that, well, I'm not benefiting from this relationship, so I'm going to write the relationship off. Yes, if there is an exceptional case, and inshallah none of us will have any personal experience of that in our own families or in our circle of friends, of abuse or of harm, then Islam does say that a person should remove him or herself from that harm. But still, an obligation of sorts does exist. That's actually mentioned in a hadith. That if, for example, a person's parents strike them, then وَإِن ضَرَبَاكَ فَقُلْ غَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمَا. If your parents strike you and you think that it was excessive, it wasn't necessary, then the best response is to say, no, I'm not taking this, or I don't have to take this, or that wasn't fair. But to say, may Allah forgive you. So you're taking a stand. You're saying that this is not right. You are asserting and drawing a line, but a very delicate line, to gently tell your parents that they shouldn't cross that line with their children. But you're doing it in a way not to say that now I'm asserting my separateness, but to say that whatever you might do, I will not blur the line between right and wrong. I will not be abused, but I will also pray that Allah will show mercy to you and forgiveness and guide you. So in that delicate way, in that gentle way, we are to respond even when parents might go over the line. But there are some parents who make it as difficult as can be for their children to show ihsan. And even though the children still have a responsibility to the parents, the Prophet said that those parents are depriving themselves of divine mercy. The ideal parent is one who makes it as easy as possible for the children to be able to do ihsan, to continue to show that kindness, not to make unreasonable requests, not to do something that might make it difficult for the child to know how to respond. Sometimes there are pressures that are put on children, that you can choose your wife or you can choose your mother. And that's a difficult situation for a person to be in. And sometimes people can navigate that, and in many cases they don't navigate it effectively. And if they don't navigate it effectively, they might end up sinning either against their wife or against their mother. Or similarly, it might be possible for a woman's parents, for example, to make demands that would make it difficult for her to honor her responsibilities to her family, to her children, or to others. Now, we have an obligation when we are in those difficult situations, and they come in life. We have an obligation to do our best to do right by each of those different relationships that we have. But the parents also have a relationship with their children that is based upon their being entrusted to the parents by Allah. And what that means is that if we're not careful about how we treat our children, if we are sending our children to hell, basically, by making it difficult for them to honor their parents, then we're also depriving ourselves of divine mercy. So sometimes parents get self-righteous, that just made a simple request. Who was the one who was there for this child from the beginning until now and is still there? And most parents have confidence that whoever their children might marry, the parents would always show more loyalty and more sincerity than that spouse might show. But that is not what the Prophet says. So that tells us both sides of the relationship. That the child still has the greater burden. The Prophet does not say, may Allah show mercy on parents who do kindness to their children and whose children do kindness to them. It's not a reciprocal relationship. The burden is greater on the children, always, because there is a debt that can never be repaid, that the parents have given a blessing to the children, or Allah has given a blessing to the child through the parents. If they didn't do anything else, then the very fact that Allah has decided to give us life, this body and this spirit, through the medium of our parents, that gives an existential and a creational debt that we owe to them, even if they were never there, never present, we didn't know who they were beyond that one point. But even that is a debt that can't be repaid. Never mind if they have been there for us, if they fed us, if they guided us, if they supported us, if they did so much else for us and prayed for us and raised us up to be successful people. So the burden is greater on the part of the children. But the reciprocal aspect of it comes from the fact that the parent has an obligation to make it easy for the child to fulfill the relationship. Now I want to look at a portion of the dua of our fourth Imam, Imam Abidi alayhi salatu wassalam, for his parents. This is the dua which the Imam used to recite frequently. It is mentioned in the Sahifa as-Sajjadiyah, and all of us can refer to the entire dua. And there is a dua of the Imam for his children, and there is of course a dua of the Imam for his parents. If we can recite it every day or frequently, that is something that will be a source of blessings for us. But especially if we sometimes are in a point in our relationship where we might might not be fulfilling the Islamic ideals. I've just had a conversation with one of my parents, and I'm not seeing eye to eye, and I need to have some kind of a pep talk. Then the best counseling that we can get are the words, the aspirations, the prayers of our ma'asumin alayhi salatu wassalam. So that's a dua that we can look at. Just one phrase from that dua. The Imam says that, "Oh Allah, this is what I ask of you, and I ask it of you because if I am going to fulfill my relationship with my parents, it's going to have to come from Allah. He will give the blessings, He will give the grace, He will give the tawfiq, and we will be able to do so." The dua of the Imam is that وَاجْعَلْ طَاعَتِي لِوَالِدَيَّ وَبِرِّي بِهِمَا أَقَرَّ لِعَيْنِي مِنْ رَقْدَةِ الْوَسْنَانِ وَأَثْلَجَ لِصَدْرِي مِنْ شَرْبَةِ الظَّمْآنِ. That, O Allah, make my obedience to my parents and make my kindness to them something that gives me more peace than when a person is fatigued after having been unable to sleep for a long time. And now they can't keep their eyes open. For them to finally find a comfortable bed and a nice mattress, and to be able to close their eyes and relax after a long, difficult day of work, then the pleasure that you get from sleep when you've been deprived of it, that is one of life's singular blessings, especially for those of us who are sleep deprived. Periods in our time when we've been sleep deprived, if you're cramming for an exam and you've had to pull an all-nighter or several all-nighters, and then you finish the difficult task, the pressure is off of you, and now you're finally able to relax. Make honoring my parents, respecting my parents, the Imam is saying, make that something that is more pleasure to me than to sleep at that moment when I really need sleep. And then the Imam says that حَتَّى أُوثِرَ عَلَى هَوَايَ هَوَاهُمَا وَأُقَدِّمَ عَلَى رِضَايَ رِضَاهُمَا. So that whenever I have a hawa, a desire, something that I want, but I find out that there is something else that my parents want, make it so that my heart wants what my parents want more than my heart wants what is pleasing to it. Make their pleasure, their happiness bigger for me, a greater source of tranquility for me than my own convenience and my own pleasure. That's the prayer that the Imam would make. And the Imam was ma'asum. He was never at a point where he would not be able to fulfill it. But there are times in our life, as I said, where we will feel ourselves pulled in different directions. I might want something and it's not what my parents want. My family might want something or might need something and it's not what my parents want. For parents also, similarly when it comes to their children, when we read these words of the Imam, when we think about them, and then when we try to see how it is that we can implement them, we come closer to being able to live that ideal of having a relationship with our spouses, with our parents, with our children, with the other members of our family that will be able to produce the fruit that Islam wants us to be able to produce from these relationships that are sacred, that have been given to us by Allah. And Karbala, as we heard in the presentation, which was very beautifully stated and eloquently done by Brother Jawad before my speech, in Karbala we find some of the best examples of how parents can relate to their children, and children can relate to their parents, and how that relationship can be built upon service to Allah, service to Islam. It can be something that is held up as a source of inspiration for all of humanity, for all time, in all circumstances, and wherever people might be in the world. There was a family that was very close to the heart of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, and that was the family of his beloved sister Zainab salamullahi alayha. This was one of those families that was split up when the Imam had to make a hurried decision to leave Medina in the month of Rajab in the 60th year of Hijrah. And the Imam, it was a difficult farewell that he did with the city of his grandfather, the Prophet. It is said that although Imam Hussein, he only had just a few short hours to be able to make the preparations for the long journey that was ahead, to get his family ready, but he made time to go and visit the grave of his grandfather. He made time to go and visit the grave of his mother. He made time to go and visit the grave of his brother. And he tarried at each of those graves. He prayed and he wept and he cried at each of those graves. But after he had bid farewell, imagine now when the Imam would come to the house of his sister and knock on the door and say that, "Oh, my sister Zainab, the time is short and the journey is long. We have to leave soon." And Lady Zainab would be standing there in her home with her sons before her and her husband Abdullah ibn Ja'far, who was also a very close member of the Imam's household, a very beloved figure by the Imam. By that time he was an old man, well past the age of 70, and he was sick with various ailments. It said that he had a very difficult and a very painful ailment within his jaw that made it difficult for him to speak, that made it difficult for him to walk. And the Imam is saying that, "Oh Abdullah, I know that you will not be able to accompany me. So I will not ask you to accompany me. And if you wanted to, then I would not let it, because it's not good for your well-being. And so I bid farewell." There was an old covenant that was made between Imam Hussein and Lady Zainab that was witnessed even by their parents. That if Imam Hussein were ever to embark on a journey when he would not have his father or his brother with him to support him, then Lady Zainab would go with the Imam, with her beloved Hussein, as a substitute for the support and the strength that would come if Imam Ali had been able to be with him. The support that would have come if Imam Hasan had been able to be with him. So Lady Zainab knew, and Abdullah knew, that Lady Zainab was not to stay in Medina and care for her husband as much as she may have wished to do so. But she was destined, and she was to accompany Imam Hussein. But imagine what a painful scene it must have been when, with a voice that was barely able to speak, Abdullah would have called his two young sons, On and Muhammad, before him. And he said that the one thing that pains me is that my beloved Hussein is embarking on a long journey, and I, who should be the first to rise up and to find my sword and prepare my weapons for battle, am too old to be able to leave my bed and accompany the Imam. My sons, you are young. You have not yet seen battle. You have not yet lived your lives. But I am not able to go, so I am sending you in my own stead. Whenever you see that your uncle Hussein needs you, then you are to serve him in my stead and in my behalf. And with that, Abdullah bid farewell to his sons. He bid farewell to Lady Zainab. And this mother, she took her sons, she accompanied Imam Hussein. And it is said that on that journey, especially the journey from Mecca to Karbala, whenever Lady Zainab would find a free moment, she was busy preparing, readying, consoling, calming, supporting all of those who were on that caravan. But whenever she would find a free moment, she would come to her two sons and say that I have brought you not just because I want to see you and I cannot bear to be separated from you. I have brought you because I know a time will come when my Hussein will be standing alone. And when he stands alone, I want to make sure that you will be in front of him and no harm will come to the Imam so long as anybody related to Zainab who is able to lift a sword is still alive. And sometimes Lady Zainab would actually go to her brother Abbas and she would say, my brother Abbas, I know that you have already been training the young men of Bani Hashim in the art of battle and how to defend themselves. But now there is much that they still need to learn. And some of these boys, including On and Muhammad, they were not yet fully grown men. The armor that was present, it would not have fit properly on their bodies. So they were going to be going to the battlefield without even the protection that a warrior would normally have. So she would come to Abbas and say that now you need to spend some extra time. Because I don't want to stand before Hussein and be embarrassed that my sons went to battle but they were not able to fight effectively. And so Abbas salam, he increased his lessons. When the day of Ashura came, it is said that Lady Zainab was anxious, not because she knew that it was just a matter of a few short hours before her sons would achieve martyrdom, but because she wanted to make sure that they would be the first to go to the battlefield. And On Muhammad, they had been trained by both their mother and father for just such a moment. They themselves had that courage and that desire to fight and show their mother that they were going to live up to the heritage of Ali, the heritage of Hashim, and the house in which they were born and raised. But whenever they would come close to their uncle and think of asking him permission, it is said that Imam Hussein would lower his gaze and tears would stream down his face, and he would not have the heart to even ask their uncle to give them permission to go to the battlefield. A time came though when Lady Zainab came with worry on her face. She said, "Oh Muhammad, so many have been martyred, and why is it that you still have not armed yourself? Why is it that you still have not gone to the battlefield?" They said, "Oh our mother, we've gone so many times, and we've wanted to ask permission, but then when we came close to our uncle, he knew what was on our mind. He broke down and his face became so pained that we didn't have the heart to ask him." And so Lady Zainab said, "Go one more time and ask Hussein alayhi salam if he will give you permission to go to the battle." This time when Ola Muhammad came, the words came out of their mouth before Imam Hussein could stop them. And when the Imam heard them asking permission to go to the battlefield, he paused for a long time. And when his tears had stopped and he was able to regain control of his own words, he said that, "Do you know that I bid farewell to your father who is an old man? He is going to have need of sons to support him in his old age. The enemies are not going to withhold from their harassment of the family of the Prophet just because the event of Karbala has taken." Awna Muhammad said that, "Don't you know that our father said that I do not expect and I do not hope to see you alive. I hope only to hear tales of your bravery. Our father bid farewell to us and he is not planning on seeing us again." Imam Hussein then said one more attempt to see if he could perhaps prolong their life for some time. The Imam said that, "I have come here with my sister Zainab, and she is going to bear so much pain on this day. Do you really wish to see your mother suffer the loss of her two sons before her very eyes?" They said that, "Our mother is standing just at a small distance, and she has our swords ready. She has already told us that she wants to see us go to the battlefield." When the Imam saw that there is no more chance to prolong their life even for a few moments, he reluctantly gave them permission. The Imam and Lady Zainab together prepared those two youths of Bani Hashim for the battle. And it is said that as the Imam would watch them doing battle, Lady Zainab was also watching, eagerly, enthusiastically, prayerfully, looking half to the battlefield and half towards the sky. "Oh Allah, do not take the courage and the strength away from my sons. Oh Allah, if it is possible by some miracle to let these two warriors rout the entire army, if the sacrifice of my two sons can save the life of Hussein ibn Ali, then let my sons be sacrificed 1,000 times, and let the living grandson of the Prophet be preserved." She saw them doing battle. She saw as each blow was struck on their bodies. She saw as their strength began to be sapped, and as they began to fall from their mounts. But it is said that Lady Zainab watched only so long as they did battle. As soon as she saw them fall as martyrs, she immediately went into the tent, because Lady Zainab did not want her brother to look towards her and feel any kind of shame that her sons had been martyred in front of her very eyes. Imam Hussein and Abbas alayhi salam, they rushed to the battlefield when they were called by the two young martyrs. They brought their bodies of Awna Muhammad back to the camp, and then Imam Hussein began to search and see where was his sister Zainab. He was thinking, what words would he use to console an old mother who had lost two sons at the prime of their life? And he searched, but he did not find her until he came to her tent and looked down, and he saw that as if there was a chadar, a veil that was strewn on the ground, lying low to the ground. Lady Zainab was praying to Allah, "Oh Allah, I thank you for having considered your humble servant Zainab Zainab worthy of offering this sacrifice in your way. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. فسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. O Allah, accept this remembrance of the sacrifices of Imam Hasan and his family and those who were with him on the day of Ashura. O Allah, by the blessings of Ahlul Bait and by the rights that they have upon each and every Muslim and each and every human being, grant us within our families and our relationships with our parents and our children and our relatives and our communities and all of those around us the blessings that you have granted to Ahlul Bayt ﷺ. Forgive our sins and our shortcomings. Bless us in this life and in the hereafter, and grant us the company and the intercession of Muhammad in the dunya and in the akhirah.